Hello, welcome to the video. I'm going to be checking out my 7900 XTX on Cyberpunk. I'm going to be trying out the AMD Fluid Motion Frames, so effectively frame generation. I'm going to be doing it at 4K. And then graphics-wise, first I'm going to just test out with FSR quality on, and we've got everything on ultra and high. Ray tracing, path tracing, everything's off. I'm going to play it first for a little bit with the AMD Fluid Motion Frames switched off, and then I'll play with it switched on as well so we can see the difference. So this is what it's like with the AMD Fluid Motion Frames off. We're getting about 70 to 80 FPS. I'm going to have to use this AMD overlay because basically it doesn't pick up on the frame generation through MSI Afterburner or anything like that. It'll literally only work through AMD overlay, so going to have to be using that, slightly different from what I normally use. But yeah, it seems like with these settings, going to be hovering in and around between 70 and 80, I think. I will check out, take a look, maybe if we can get into a more city area. See how much our frames drop. I think we'd probably see it drop into the 60s, I should imagine. GPU power looks pretty much the same as normal. It's pretty much maxed out. So, by the looks of it, we've got about 10 gigs of VRAM being used. It seems probably about right, I think, 4K with ray tracing and everything off. I think maybe we see a bit higher than that normally. I know with 4K ray tracing, or path tracing at least, you're normally seeing about 16 gig, I think, if I remember. I've got a little bit of ghosting going on, it seems like, on the car here, which is, I assume, what is being caused by FSR. Dipping into the 60s a bit here as well. But overall, performance seems pretty good, not too bad. It's playable, at least with these settings. I'm going to try and get to a city area so we can take a look at that. It is stuttering a little bit, I can feel. In the frame time there, you can see it. A couple of stutters. But it's kind of been like that, this game overall, and pretty much anything I play, really. So there, dips into the kind of almost mid-60s-ish, 67. '65. So you're probably, with these settings, at least FSR quality, going to at least stay above 60, which is decent. Obviously, we're not running any ray tracing or anything. You'd expect if you switch that on, it would really destroy the performance. Okay, so now I've switched on the AMD Fluid Motion Frames, and as you can see, it's pretty much doubled our FPS. So now we've gone from kind of 65 to 70 to, well, we're at about 120 to 130, so round about double on average. We'd probably be averaging about 65-ish here, so we're getting like, yeah, pretty much double. Or maybe just under, sometimes slightly over. So, very, very impressive increase of FPS. The frame time does look very strange. We saw this issue with FSR 3 and Forspoken when I tried that. It made the frame time look crazy, which is looking similar here to what it was in Forspoken as well. GPU utilization still 100%. VRAM looks about the same as well. I know with nvidia cards, you switch on frame generation, oftentimes you see it increase VRAM by 1 or 2 gig. But it looks like it hasn't really changed that at all. So definitely an impressive increase of FPS. Not noticing any latency or anything like that. Thought maybe I do have anti-lag on as well, so that's likely combating some of that. So definitely a nice increase in performance. It plays nicely. Doesn't feel like it's stuttering for me anymore, which we were getting before. But it's a bit harder to tell because that frame time is so up and down. It's a bit harder to tell. Still getting the ghosting on the car as well. I know that's more an image. It's not worse with the fluid motion frames on or off. It's about the same. Okay, so I now wanted to try it out. We've got 4K still, and I wanted to try it out with path tracing and stuff on, so I've had to drop down to FSR Performance. We've got everything maxed high or ultra like we had before, but instead now we've got path tracing on here. So this is technically ray tracing overdrive. This is without AMD Fluid Motion Frames at first, so our frames are going to be quite bad. I think we're looking at about 20, maybe under 23 FPS by the looks of it. Kind of interested to see. I think AMD have said you should be getting at least 50 to 60 FPS before enabling fluid motion frames, so obviously our previous test made sense because we were above 60 when we used it. I do want to see what this is like when we've got, say, something like 20. I know with nvidia frame generation you can get away with oftentimes being at about 30 FPS if you switch it on. If you're below 30 and you switch it on, the latency can be quite bad. But it kind of sometimes depends on the game too, though. Some games I think handle it better than others. But obviously there's performance here with path tracing on is really not too good. The fact we're using FSR Performance as well, I mean, trying to play this even with quality is really not too good. Our VRAM, obviously, like we were talking about, our VRAM, just by switching path tracing on, it's gone up by about 3.5 gigs. So we're at about 13.5 gig now. Right, so I've just enabled AMD Fluid Motion Frames, and it looks like it's doubled our frames. Well, not quite. We're dipping into the 30s here. But we started off with 40. So it almost doubled. Seems to be when there's lots of movement, it drops the FPS quite a lot. See, like here, we're dropping down to what we had before. Yeah, it's actually worse. We're getting 18 now. Yeah, it doesn't seem to perform too good. The latency isn't really any different for me, though. 52 milliseconds. Oh, actually, it is bad. It's worse. It's worse than it was with without the fluid motion frames. It's not horrendous, but it's definitely noticeable. Still, path tracing still not really a plausible thing at all to run on these AMD cards unless you drop the resolution loads. But even then, the frame rate is still sometimes, often cases, not that amazing. To really even run it here, we need ultra performance on at least at 4K. VRAM, interesting, actually looks like it's gone up by switching it on. We were at 13.5, now we're over 14. Which we didn't see with ray tracing off. We didn't see that increase with fluid motion frames. Okay, so I'm now just going to try out just normal ray tracing. So I'm going to switch path tracing off and just have normal ray tracing on. I'm still at 4K. We've got FSR Performance on still. And then the settings are high or ultra like we had before. And then as you can see here, we've just got Psycho ray tracing, but path tracing is switched off. So I want to see how it kind of performs with that instead. It looked to me like we were getting about 50 to 60 FPS, yeah, 54. So a lot better than when we had path tracing on. This might actually now be doable, at least with just normal ray tracing. Seems like it'll actually be possible with fluid motion frames. I've currently got that off, but when enabling that, which I'll do in a sec, we should see our frames double, so it should be, what, around about kind of 80 to 100, I'd say, by the look of it. Okay, so I've just now enabled fluid motion frames, and yeah, it looks like we're doubling our frames, so we're between 80 and 100, like I thought. I am noticing, though, the input lag. I'm noticing it quite badly here. Maybe it's just because I've kind of tested it more now, but I am really noticing it. I see it's less than, it's not as bad as when we had path tracing. On that stat, you can see the frame gen lag. The latency's not as much as path tracing. I think it was at 50. So now we're at 28, 29. But I am noticing it more, switching fluid motion frames on and off. I'm definitely noticing that more. And I have anti-lag on as well. But it's definitely noticeable for me. Seems like it performs worse with ray tracing on. Ray tracing or path tracing feels like the latency's way more intense, but I guess that's because our frames are lower. So obviously the lower your frames are native, not native, but the lower your frames are before you enable fluid motion frames, the worse the latency is going to be. You know, if you're above, I guess 50 to 60 like they recommend, you're probably not going to have too bad latency. So yeah, I'd definitely probably try and stick to that if you can, and make sure you've got at least 50 or 60. I think we were hovering around that, but I think we're maybe just on the lower end of it because we were hitting the 40s with it off. So we'd have to enable ultra performance, I think, to give us above 50 to 60, and then it probably isn't so bad. The other slightly odd thing to me is I'm just not convinced by this frame rate. I'm on my 144 hertz display, and it just doesn't look like 90 to 100 FPS to me. Like, this looks the same as when I had it at 50. Which I find odd. And I'd say I'm probably a pretty good guess of frame rate. I see different frame rates enough. And I'm not convinced that this is it's saying 100 FPS. It doesn't look like 100 to me. Not entirely convinced by that.
Security or standard? Thanks to the bulletproof minivan, your only worry is getting stuck in traffic.
That's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Make sure to like the video, drop me a comment, let me know what you think of the fluid motion frame so far, and I'll catch you next time.